known as 4-hydroxy-N-dipropyltryptamine, and colloquially referred to as prosin. It was first synthesized by everybody's favourite chemist, Alexander Shulgin, and is the 4-hydroxyl analogue of DPT, which is a substance we've covered many times on the channel in the past, and it's produced some otherworldly, mystical experiences in great abundance. So it'll be interesting to see how this one compares to the other DPT reports and see if there's any similarities. Surprisingly powerful with entity contact. A 4HO DPT trip report by Tim Schull. Posted at earwid.org, September 19, 2019. At a dose of 92mg. This was my first experience with this drug. I took this amount because I'd heard that 4-HO-DPT was less potent by mass than other 4-substituted tryptamines, and I read a trip report on this dose that led me to believe it would be around the intensity of perhaps 35 to 45mg of 4-ACO-DMT. I was wrong. It was the second strongest trip of my life as of writing. At the time of this trip, I was coming out of an intense identity and existential crisis that had manifested in the frequent use of large doses of 4-subtryptamines, so I was psychologically okay, but definitely not in a normal state of mind. I remember taking it. I remember perhaps 25 minutes later watching patterns stand up in relief against my wall, and after that, I do not remember anything in this reality. The rest of this trip report describes a series of events I remember, but I have no idea what order they happened in. So don't take this as a chronological retelling. I was viewing myself in the third person, at eye level, perhaps 15 feet away. There was no front or back to the building I was in, and the background was a sunny, slightly cloudy sky, or flat panels of colour depending on the time. The building around me was populated with objects that would exist in a normal human building, but the building was shaped into chaotic geometric shapes that defied gravity and all laws of physics. As holes opened up in the shifting rooms around me, I stepped into other rooms, or my body did, moving from place to place while simultaneously staying completely still. The building around me changed in form. In particular, I remember a drab office, a Persian throne room, a desert oasis, my own home, an apartment building under construction, as well as a skyway with glass walls and some sort of room made of gold and sapphires. But there were many more than that. Those are just what I can recall. I viewed a canvas divided into two colours. These colours were at odds and poked and prodded each other. Both fluctuated through and beyond the rainbow, but in general, the first one stayed primarily white and red, and the second was usually black. I assigned this order because I was identifying the first one as myself. My entire being was a blob of colour, and it was me. I pushed back against the other colour, knowing it was pointless, that neither would win, but it was all we existed for, to interact with each other. The other colour was in a sense an enemy, but in an equally real sense was a colleague who I conflicted with cordially, without any personal judgment. And when I say conflicted, I don't mean we just nudged at each other. It began that way, but we came to embody all conflicts and contradictions as they exist in our world. I remember taking the form of warring generals, commanding armies made up of ourselves, in flat monocolour design like an old video game, and as we advanced and our front waves died, our soldiers progressed through the ages and technology advanced in seconds, such that a soldier that began a battle with a rag and a sling would suddenly find themselves with now an axe, now a spear, now a sword, now a bayoneted gun, and now an M16. I remember viewing the two of us as physical forces, gravity, electromagnetism, and the nuclear forces fighting each other, pulling reality in opposite directions, seemingly in conflict, but underneath that was in fact harmony, as our opposing influences resulted in the way all things are. Contradictions within the essence of things resolve themselves into everything. Basically, I became one half of the great duality that is the engine of all change and development in the universe. Towards the end, I realised that this was fundamentally similar to Taoism, and my adversary and I formed into the yin and yang. This was the first, and to this day only Taoist imagery I've ever seen while tripping. At some point, I came to perceive that all of time had been, and would be, a progression through three different states of being. What we normally perceive as linear, continuous time was in fact a discrete periodic function, meaning that it had finite possible values, 3 of them, and these repeated in the same order forever. It was geometric time, triangular time. I understood this geometric time in a very concrete visual way that was predominantly orange, but I otherwise cannot describe. There exists a collection of places and scenarios that I have seen and have been multiple times across multiple trips. On this trip, I saw many of them. I'll try to describe as many as I can remember in as much detail as possible. but I'll most likely only recall a third or so of them. These different places and scenarios were arranged in a geometric way, which to explain, I will go on a tangent that will become relevant. Most people think of the arrangement of the Death Star in one of two ways. Either it is like a series of concentric spheres, or it is a sphere split into stacked, circular floors, the layer cake model. It is this layer cake model that is the image I am going for. Picture that, but each level is a different one of these places I will describe. And, of course, the sphere does not stay a sphere, but transitions at breakneck pace through a series of psychedelic geometry. I saw this object every time I switched between these visions. I find myself in a dark place, with a dark purple stone pillar in front of me, extending infinitely up and down. This pillar is covered in geometric patterns, and I rush up it, towards something maybe, extremely fast. So fast that I can't ever see the pattern on the pillar, but I do know that it's there. I then find that I am in the back of a white van, parked in a parking lot at a beach, which closely resembles Linda Mar Beach in California. The back of the van is open, and I am staring out of it at the ocean, which is turbulent with 5 to 6 foot waves, and the sky is overcast. I sit inside a 2-story building, which consists entirely of empty rooms with hardwood floors and white paint on the walls and ceiling. I know this, despite the fact that I stay inside a single room, because my perspective is third-person omniscient. I simultaneously stare out the floor-to-ceiling window on the second floor, and watch myself from everywhere else, both inside the building and out. The building is white on the outside and shaped in a very angular, cuboid way. The second floor is smaller than the first, giving the building a stair shape. The building is situated in the middle of a vineyard, and by the middle, I mean literally the middle. The vines grow right up to the walls of the building. There is no evidence that there should be a building here. There is no road to it, not even a door. It is entirely wall and window. I'm halfway down a matte white stairway. In front of me and a bit to the left stands a very tall being of some type. So tall that I only ever see it up to the elbows, never looking at the face. Its proportions are off, like it has been stretched from a normal human into a being 50 feet tall, but not in an alien creepy way. The right wall borders the staircase and is the same matte white as it. At the bottom of the staircase there is an arch on the right wall leading into another room. There is no left wall or ceiling, only a white mist that creates the distinct sense of a barrier, but without any rigid line of impassability. There is no back wall. The room extends indefinitely. The being here with me walks through the arch and I follow it into the next room. I find myself at the arch it just came from my left, the same wall extending towards infinity, and the same mist as before on my right. In front of me, there is a floating geometric shape that fluctuates rapidly in terms of both form and colour, but generally leaves the impression of a red teardrop diamond, perhaps 10 to 12 feet in height and half that in width. I get the sense that the being created this object as a sort of abstract art piece and that it wished to show it to me, even though it knew that I could never truly understand what it signified. I've come to refer to this place as the art room. The entity in this room is the only entity I have ever encountered more than once. I replayed this exact same scenario about a month later in a trip on 50mg of 4-HO-DPT, 28mg of 4-ACO-DMT, and 10mg of 4-HO-MET. This is interesting to me. I've encountered the exact same entity twice, but only when this one drug was involved. A field of rolling shallow hills covered in long soft emerald green grass and surrounded by blossoming cherry trees. The air is slightly sweet. Life is very peaceful. I'm on one of those rides that consists of 20 chairs horizontally in a row, attached to an apparatus that moves in a large circle, keeping the chairs the right way up. It is the day after my parents told us they were getting divorced, and my dad had taken us to the county fair. I could see him from my chair with a cryptic, slightly melancholy look on his face. This is a real memory that I often come back to. A concrete structure that I perceive as being in the process of decaying. It is very dreary and the sky above is overcast. The ground outside the building has no grass whatsoever, no life, only stone and dark dead dirt. The whole place has this post-apocalyptic vibe to it. I am now in a vast empty white space. There is nothing but me and maybe the music I am listening to here. It seems like time does not pass. That is all I can remember. This is one of the most psychologically interesting experiences I've ever had, and writing this 1.5 years later, I'm still in awe of it. It seems many people get little to no effect from this drug, but this is clearly not the case for me. There's something interesting going on here.
This is Dave, head of marketing at a ketchup company about to use Grammarly to handle a tight deadline. 2 weeks? Not ideal. Good thing Grammarly's tone suggestions can help move things forward, because conveying confidence can make the
In order for me to recount this experience accurately, I must first give some necessary context. Roughly 3 weeks prior to this trip, I began to notice a subtle yet extremely profound shift in my perception of life and reality. I cannot exactly pinpoint when or how this shift occurred, but all I can say is that since about mid to late December, I have not perceived life through the bounds of an ego structure. Instead, I have been perceiving and operating from a place of fundamental, permanent, unmoving beingness. Every aspect and event that this body-mind experiences I have perceived as a reflection of who and what I am fundamentally and existentially. For the past few weeks, literally everything I do, including just existing, feels simultaneously like the most profound thing in all of existence, as well as simply a normal mundane happening. The person known as TR just feels like a character that I am contently playing as in this experience of life. Occasionally, at times, when I have deeply felt into this permanent fundamental beingness, it has resulted in tears, and I found myself spontaneously saying, "It was in my face the whole time." The most obvious thing, non-thing, in all of existence, and the most profound thing, non-thing, in all of existence is right here, and has always been right here. This fundamental, unmoving beingness feels like the basal structure, again it's not a thing, from which all forms of existence arise, and form from, and fall and dissolve back into. My favourite philosopher and spiritual teacher, Ken Wilber, has referred to this as the ground of all being, or the simple feeling of being. It feels surreal and almost dreamlike, but very grounded and mundane. I feel much lighter and more free. Nothing matters, but everything is sacred. I am almost reluctant to share, as I do not want to fool and or delude myself in thinking that full liberation is now my perception in life, but I feel that my experience may benefit other people in their journeys, and thus I am sharing this. Now, with that context being provided, I will get to describing the events of my DMT trip experience. During the week leading up to this experience, I prepared for it in the following ways. I took my existing meditation, mindfulness and shadow work practices and ramped them up threefold. I did my best to stay in mindfulness for as many hours as I possibly could each day, as well as meditating about 2 hours a day. Additionally, I kept a vigilant watch of my internal landscape, and every day I wrote at length on any and all aspects of myself that were out of alignment with my true natural self and the ebb and flow of the totality of existence. Additionally, I observed the excitement within the ego structure in the days leading up to this experience. On the day of the trip, I began final preparations about an hour before. I meditated and listened to Gregorian chants as I normally do before entheogenic experiences. At around 2 in the afternoon, I weighed out approximately 50 milligrams of N,N-dimethyltryptamine and placed it into the vaping bottle which I would use to inhale the substance from. As I placed the DMT into the vaping bottle, it was as if my whole body was aware of the profundity that was about to occur. I sat down at the edge of my bed, sparked my lighter and began to vaporize the DMT. A thick white vapor filled the container and my body and mind was simultaneously filled with reverence, anxiety and awe. I thanked every being, both physical and non-physical, who has helped me in this life, in allowing me to cultivate this experience. I then exhaled my lungs as completely as I could, unfastened the bottle cap and took in the largest inhale of my life. In a matter of 3 seconds or so, I inhaled all 50 milligrams of the DMT vapor in a single hit. I held it in my lungs for around 5 seconds or so before slowly exhaling it. The first thought I had was, I wonder how long it will take for this to come on, and before the thought could even finish, Within 3 or 4 seconds, my vision extremely quickly exploded into a mandala of infinitely beautiful fractals of first hundreds and then thousands of colours. Simultaneously, I heard the iconic, intensely loud humming ringing in my ears. Additionally, I began to feel what I can only describe as the feeling of my whole body dissolving, becoming less and less and less relevant to my experience of existing. In the few seconds left that I had any awareness of a physical world, I quickly put down the bottle and laid down in my bed. By now, perhaps 10 or 15 seconds into the trip, I was essentially blinded by billions of infinitely beautiful mandala fractals and deafened by the intense humming that had now taken on a very technological, almost synthesized sound as well. As any and all awareness of having a physical body or being in a physical world continued to dissolve, I felt the most nauseous I have ever felt in my entire life, and felt a tremendous urge to vomit, even though I had not eaten in almost 24 hours. At the same time, the concept of having a life and of ever being born was quickly fading away into the sea of infinity. The body high became so intense that it felt like I was quickly melting, as if my body was being deconstructed and broken down at a cellular level. With what little bodily awareness I had left, I reached for my vomit bucket and pulled it closer. However, by the time my arm pulled the bucket closer to me, all notion of existing in a physical world was gone. The now infinite sea of mandala fractals, as well as the intense synth-like humming, had entirely engulfed my entire sensory perception of reality. All memory of my personal life, who I was, Earth, and the experience of life was now gone, and the only existence I knew was the infinite realm of the infinite menagerie of forms that comprised the totality of phenomenological existence. The last thing I felt as my familiar individuated consciousness before blasting off was complete relaxation, warmth and love, completely washing over my entire being on a subatomic level. In the few seconds that it took for all of this to happen, my consciousness was blasted out of the body-mind structure at a speed and intensity several orders of magnitude beyond the speed of light, to a place beyond the totality of physical existence, beyond all universes, multiverses, and realms of existence. As my consciousness was being transported at this unimaginable speed, I perceived all of the realms of existence that I encountered. I saw every alien species in all of existence, every form of technology, the history of every civilization in all of existence, every form of information relay, all of the deepest, darkest, most horrible and hellish realms of existence, and the horrid entities that resided there, and all of the highest, most beautiful and heavenly realms of existence, and all of the wonderful entities that resided there. As this profoundly powerful travel of my consciousness continued, I perceived what appeared to be this small, mischievous, extraordinarily loving, very playful entity. I knew this was a tryptamine jester. The projection I saw was short, thin, and somewhat humanoid. Its body was comprised of technological light energy and was a mosaic of thousands of colours all tessellated, interwoven and oscillating with each other. The energy I got from this being that was travelling with me was almost childlike, but I knew this being was so extremely wise. Our energies interacted, and it showed me how the basics of the physical spatio-temporal realm of existence works. I saw the same torus energy fields in all life forms in physical existence, similar to what I saw on a profound LSD trip 3 years ago. I was also shown how critically important the law of conservation of energy is, specifically in keeping the totality of all the multiverses in the relative realm of physicality and balance. Additionally, while I was travelling with this tryptamine jester, I was showered in this infinite universal love that completely pervaded my being. The same infinite universal love that I had experienced in April of last year. All of this profundity occurred in what felt like seconds, or it could have been trillions of years. From my perspective, it did not seem to matter, as time was no longer relevant. Eventually, me and this friendly jester parted ways. My individuated consciousness eventually travelled beyond all of the realms of existence that could possibly manifest, beyond all realms of form. I went beyond the pretty light show of the phenomena existence, and thus, I was no longer enamored by the infinite light show of phenomenal existence, and now there was only the void, the infinite, unmanifest void. It was in this non-place of absolute transcendence and immutable nothingness that my point of individuated consciousness was completely obliterated shockingly quickly. There was absolutely nothing left. Any semblance of an individuated me or any personal life was entirely gone. There was never a TR. There was never a human organism who experienced a multi-year-long spiritual journey of awakening. There was only the awareness of the totality of all of existence. And that totality consciousness is the absolute purest form of what all of existence is, what I am, and what we all are. With that obliteration of illusory demarcated consciousness, there was a grand, all-encompassing merging with everything in all of existence. In a single femtosecond, my individuated consciousness was entirely obliterated and assimilated into the totality of all of existence. I was home. This was the Godhead. This was the ground of all being. This absolute unmanifest eternal nothingness was the ultimate, the truth, God. However, this was simultaneously and paradoxically nothing special, and absolutely the most holy thing in existence. It all felt very familiar, and it was literally the most obvious thing. I was everything, and I knew everything. I was the infinite mind of God. I, pure unmanifest totality consciousness, was the ground of all creation in existence. I was the foundation for all forms that arise and fall eternally and infinitely. And simultaneously, I, the ground and foundation for all forms in infinity, was also imbued within and manifested as all forms in the totality of myself. I resided as this infinite, unmanifest, absolute nothingness for a Googleplex number of years until I wanted to do something else. So I decided to create a part of myself as a few billion realms of existence and imbue those realms with forms of life all the way down to oversouls, souls, spirits, and all manner of individuated consciousnesses. And eventually, I found my small particular individuated consciousness, and I decided to play as it and to experience through it. And so I thus began the process of pretending to forget that I am the unmanifest ground of all being and the totality of all of existence. I continued to pretend to forget things until I was only experiencing an individuated consciousness on a journey through a strange realm of existence. Now that I was again perceiving as an individuated consciousness, I also began to return to the realm of form, but something was different. My existence was potentiated, and I still remembered some of my creative power, so I decided I would like to talk to someone. So I created a realm of existence. Even though I was now only an individuated consciousness, I still had an incredible amount of creative power, enough to create a sea of multiverses. Extremely tiny and minute compared to what I was capable of as the totality, but it was still more than sufficient for what I intended to do. And so I continued to create this strange tryptamine realm until I deemed it to be sufficient, and then I went about a second recursive process of pretending to forget enough so that I could dive into this realm as an even smaller individuated consciousness. Once I did this, I felt more familiar, more like how I was a Googleplex number of years ago. I navigated through this tryptamine realm I had created until I came to an infinitely complex geometric fractal room. I phased through the outer structure of this room, and inside I encountered two of the tryptamine jesters. This time, however, I primarily perceived only their energies. One of the jesters was the same one that I had met from before. They were extremely happy to see me and invited me in, so I came in with them, and even though I was a disembodied consciousness, I sat down with the two jesters at the table-like structure they were at. From there we had a very long talk about everything. We communicated energetically, telepathically, about every question I could ask and about every subject that they were interested in. This conversation might have lasted for 15 minutes or a few thousand hours. Again, time was irrelevant. Here's some of what we communicated about. I am God. So are they, and so is everything else in all of existence. Before incarnating into the physical realm of existence, I chose to do this life thing and came to this planet called Earth, as this exact point in the evolutionary history of its biosphere, and live a life as a human. They told me that this realm that we were currently in was the realm I was in before I incarnated into physicality, and I did indeed recognise this place. It all felt so familiar. The tryptamine jesters told me of the intricate energetic complexities of life. They also explained to me that the experience of being born and living through a life and dying is just one option of experiencing that souls have in order to learn and grow from. There are literally trillions of other options like life, but different that other souls choose in order to grow and learn. It's just that I chose to do the life thing because that was one of the more involved, one of the more intricate, and most excitingly, one of the more challenging options to experience. They told me that I never was born and can never die, that I created the totality of all of existence, and that this is just a game that I am playing with myself, pretending to be infinite life forms as vectors of my own consciousness, forever and forever. As we communicated, we also talked about how strange we thought it was that life forms take life so seriously. It was so ludicrous to us. It's just a game. How can anyone take this so seriously? The three of us had a good laugh about this. Eventually, we got around to talking about my human organism avatar and my experience of living a life back on Earth. Both of the tryptamine jesters clearly told me that my individuation is already doing well on the path of truth and non-dual realization. They also kindly commented that my individuation has already done thousands of Earth hours of psycho-spiritual work for the purposes of developing itself and showing up in its earthly life as its most true, natural and authentic version. In fact, they were making it so abundantly clear that I had done well in dedicating myself to awakening that they started joking about it, and at one point they jokingly asked something along the lines of, "Dude, why did you even smoke this stuff? You've already got it. You didn't really need this to wake up and fully remember who you are, but we're glad you're here anyway." We continued to speak about the intricacies of existence, how everything is God, and how I created all of this game to play with myself forever, and how they kept repeating over and over again, almost to the point of annoyance on their part. "Yes, you've already got it. See, you already knew this." At the end of our conversation, the jesters told me that they would allow my individuated consciousness to bring back this experience and information to the memory centers of my physical body's brain when I returned. I then thanked the two kind, playful jesters. As soon as our interaction concluded, my consciousness was shot back to my body with a speed and intensity several orders of magnitude beyond the speed of light. I saw all of the physical realms of existence again on the way back, and I was forgetting so many things the closer I got back to my home universe and the closer I got back to my body on Earth. I remember having to first reconstruct my body from consciousness initially, and then from the physical elements, oxygen, carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, calcium, phosphorus, etc. This felt like a very long and involved process, but also very intuitive. When my consciousness did return back to my body, it was very fast and intense. My whole body felt like it was vibrating, and my ears still somewhat had that humming ringing. Immediately upon being back there was still no familiar personal sense of self, only an undifferentiated mass of experiencing through sensory perception. I knew nothing. I did not know what I was, what this place was, or what anything was. At this point, I also began to reconstruct my psychology, including things like memory and language. In a few seconds, I went from an undifferentiated mass of experiencing to infantile consciousness, to childlike consciousness, to adolescent consciousness, back up to my 24-year-old conscious awareness. At this point, I had reconstructed myself sufficiently enough so that I could properly interface with the world again. Upon opening my eyes, my vision was still coming back, as if coming out of some sort of extreme tunnel vision. Upon waking up, I noticed that my body had not moved a single centimetre throughout that entire experience. I decided to move. I slowly began to raise my fingers one at a time in order to familiarise myself with my neuromuscular system again. After 10 or 15 seconds of this, I began to make bilateral symmetrical yogic positions with my hands, through little volition of my own. feeling as if my body was a conduit for an intense form of energy. Every time I have done a psychedelic, this happens. While making these strange yet beautiful and blissfully relaxing movements, I uttered these words slowly at first. Thank you for this experience that we call life. I then repeated this over and over until it became a mantra, while I continued to move my arms doing this bilateral symmetrical yoga. After a few minutes of doing this, there was then a short intermission. There were no thoughts or actions, only simply existing, only being a part of the whole of existence. All I could say repeatedly at this was, wow, wow, oh wow. Then the flood of insights began to pour in. Here are some of the most significant insights that came in. Number 1 being, accept your godhood. Show up as much of yourself as you can in this life. God wanted to be this version, this specific individuation of God. Upon realising the implications of this, I hugged myself and began to cry some. I deeply felt and realised how important to existence I am and we all are. That without me, you and everyone and everything else in existence, that infinity can't be infinite. This is why it's of the utmost importance that we show up as our most authentic, true, natural selves and be our best and highest versions of ourselves in life to be the best of our ability. I was also washed with love upon this realisation. Number 2. I then remembered back to 4 years ago when I first had the desire to do psychedelics and visit all manners of strange realms of existence and speak with all kinds of aliens. And it became extraordinarily and abundantly clear that there is nothing mundane about any of this experience here on Earth in my